Hello, everyone. Welcome to Life Edge, because life just doesn't have to be mediocre. I am joined today by the doctor, the one and only, Susan Nash. How are you, Susan?
Great. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and we have a very interesting guest and very apropos for our times today. Here we go.
Yes.
Susan, would you like to introduce our guest?
Absolutely. So today we have Dr. Larry Davis. He's a professor of economics at Texas A&M, Texarkana in Texas. Hi, Larry.
Hi, how are you today?
Great. Now I want to just jump in with some tough questions, if you don't mind.
Oh, she's going to jump in with tough questions right away.
Do you mind, Larry? Dr. Davis?
So you're going to give me your best shot in the beginning.
I'm going to jump in and ask you if you are a believer in strategic planning, or do you think it's overrated?
Oh, I'm a firm believer in strategic planning. That's one of my teaching fields, and I get a little frustrated that people often claim to have formal planning processes, but in fact they just get together on a Tuesday afternoon and talk for a while and brainstorm and call that a plan, and that's not really a plan. It sends companies and individuals off in erroneous directions that have some not too good consequences because the process is not there.
You know, that's a good point, Larry, because one thing I've noticed is I've been in quote-unquote brainstorming sessions recently. You know, throughout the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years, I've noticed some changes where I would say our brainstorming sessions are now candy-coated. So there's nothing to ever challenge anyone. All ideas are good no matter how stupid some of them are, and some of them are very stupid. And how do you get anywhere?
Well, sometimes in the brainstorming candy-coated sessions, as you described them, which is appropriate, they come out of those meetings, we want to be the best in the world, and we want to be the best at what we do. Well, that's pretty vague and not measurable.
Yep.
And it's just not a meaningless process.
Well, that's a really good point. And one of the things that I wonder about is I think, okay, sometimes we get out of the brainstorming sessions, we have a number of action steps. Now, isn't it enough just to have a lot of action steps? I mean, doesn't that help you be strategic?
Rick, could you repeat that, please?
If you have a lot of action steps, will that help you with your strategic plan?
So if you have a lot of action steps, would that help you with your strategic plan?
I don't know that you need a defined number of action steps, but action is a part of the planning process. I mean, to give some background and how this all comes about, I mean, management was once defined as getting things done through people, and people who were managers placed the emphasis on the through people part of it because they were a manager, and they didn't focus on the getting things done. And ultimately, they came forth and presented or emphasized the getting things done. And anyway, there was a new concept that came along at some point. They called it long-range planning, and I think that was defective from the very beginning. In the long-range planning, they emphasized the long range, and they were looking out from 5 to 7 years. Now we're sitting here on a hot August afternoon in 2015. Can any of us or anyone else really look out to 2022, 7 years from now, and with any accuracy predict where we might be or what might be going on in the world? It was very faulty.
I think that's a good point, but I will take issue with you. And this is what I'd like to say. I think that potentially we can at least say that we can put together a vision of our values and a mission statement based on values. Would that help?
Well, keep in mind that even the mission statement is dynamic, and that should be reviewed periodically, I would say annually. And your mission statement and your goals and objectives are based upon information that you have at the time. And in this dynamic world, things are going to be changing next year or the next, or so, it's probably significantly within the next 5 to 7 years. So you need to redirect periodically.
And Susan, there's another thing that's happening right now, which is the equation. There's a thing added to the equation, which is total uncertainty, because now you've got the government, which for the most part stayed out of business, in business's face, every which way you look at it. So that creates more uncertainty, more instability, and even harder to do strategic planning because you have no idea what kind of lunacy is going to come down from the government. Just saying.
No, good point. I mean, and sometimes it's a good thing, and sometimes it's reactive. I mean, for example, we've talked about this before in this show. We've talked about the government's response to earthquakes in Oklahoma, and the local government saying, "Okay, we need to stop and at least examine why we're having earthquakes because they're starting to be significant." So I know that it's tempting to say that regulation is sort of obstaculizes and is bad for business, but sometimes in the long run it's important, at least for consumer safety and actually in the long-term viability of some of the companies. So Larry, I have a question for you. Two questions really. When can government regulations be good for business and strategic planning, and when can they be bad? So one is good, one is bad.
So what she's saying is, when can government regulations be good for business, and when can they be bad?
Well, it depends on the business. I mean, when the auto industry went bankrupt, certainly the government was good for General Motors and the bailout and the loans that they gave them. Others felt shortchanged by the government because they didn't get the equal treatment, and a lot of businesses were failing because they didn't get the same treatment. Citibank and some of the other large financial institutions, they got a lot of support, and others, didn't get the support during the tough economic times. So is it good or bad? It depends on the vantage point that you're sitting in.
Right, and to a certain point, we're dealing with one other thing, which is, I would say, definitely a bad thing, and that's the crony capitalistic part of our society right now. I'm all for capitalism, but crony capitalism kind of ruins the whole pot for everybody because it plays favorites. He with the most bucks wins, or the most influence wins. And that's not good for anybody, except for the one company benefiting from crony capitalism. And we're seeing a lot of that, the playing favorites between the companies. And that's what happened during the financial meltdown back in 2009, timeframe 2008, 2009, when you've got one stock trading company making sure that its competitors go under. That's not good. I mean, to me, those things are just, that's where the whole system starts falling apart. When you can't have it's never going to be a level playing field, but at least somewhat level.
Well, Rick, you make a good point. I mean, you're kind of alluding to the lobbyist system.
Yes, which is bad.
And senators to represent us, and it appears they look down on us to be their servants, to be at their beck and call, and they're influenced by the lobbyists, and I think that's a big problem with things that happen in our business world.
Yeah. So what do you think, from a strategic planning perspective, what do businesses do right now? How do they work? As before it was through people, they managed to make change happen within companies and everything else. How is that changing? We have different workforces. We have many generations now in the workforce. How does a company plan successfully for, with the variables and with what they know?
I think they need to buy into a process. I mean, strategic planning is a process, and as I mentioned earlier, it's not a Tuesday afternoon get-together. I mean, there are different models of planning, and the one that I would subscribe to, it starts out with something called environmental analysis. You need to look out there and see what the governmental influences are, the things they allow you to do, or the things they encourage you to do or won't allow you to do. You need to consider competition. Maybe in localities, you need consideration of ordinances that may either encourage or discourage a business. I've seen businesses in this area, restaurants that wanted to go into business, ultimately made a decision not to do it because of the cost of putting in something called a grease trap. They didn't anticipate the $10,000 to $15,000 cost to do that. And
okay, this is great, but what exactly is a grease trap? And why would it be so expensive? So, Larry, what is a grease trap?
A grease trap? It's where you have a restaurant and you're cooking and you use grease, and rather than pouring it down the drain to contaminate the sewer systems, it is a device or some kind of system that would collect the grease and not let it get distributed in the municipal sewer systems and clog them. I mean, it's a requirement.
It's interesting it's so expensive. I mean, I see a big business opportunity there for creating cheap grease traps.
You would think so.
Well, actually, Susan, I don't know how much fast food you eat, but we are usually the grease traps.
Good point. Good point. But anyway, in that process, that you need to look externally to what's going on. And I'm on the board of directors of a financial institution, and one of the issues that we were dealing with is the number of people filing for bankruptcy. And as that was turning out, I mean, that's a valid process for those with a legitimate need, but we found that a number of those people filing for bankruptcy were doing that only from legal advice, and that was a financial strategy for them. Run up as big a bills as you can and then file the bankruptcy to take the full advantage of it. And so, financial institutions for years, they were looking for some relief in bankruptcy legislation that took a long time, and finally that was accomplished to change that environment a little bit. But once you look at the environment, regardless of what all the elements are for a particular business, you need to look internally also, whether it's a startup business or an existing business. You need to look at the number and quality of your people. You need to consider the condition of your facilities. Do you have facilities, buildings that are about to fall down? Are they new? Or in terms of the business that exists, do you need opportunities or the necessity of expanding and building more? You need to consider financial resources, either the reserves that exist or the ability to go borrow. So that's consideration. I've seen businesses that were out there wanting to expand, and yet they didn't have or could not get the financial support they needed to accomplish what they wanted to do. So you need to look at the internal pluses and the internal restrictions or minuses.
You know, Larry, it's a really good point, and I'm curious about one thing. This is an area that I've interviewed many master's candidates, many either bachelor's or master's candidates, especially in business, throughout the years. And what you're saying is absolutely spot on. What I'm seeing out there in terms of the corporate world, in terms of newbies in the corporate world, and this is anywhere, I guess you have a newbie, they're not taught in many of the colleges. And I'll tell you from experience, there aren't that many professors like you who have the wisdom to teach what you're talking about. They're not taught to look at the picture as a whole. They look at little pieces. And they have a hard time envisioning the whole when they're stuck in the minutia. And how do you work around that, starting at, let's say, college, and making it to the point when they actually get jobs and they work in the real world, they're not stuck in that minutia, that they can actually have some experience seeing the bigger picture so they can make intelligent decisions and work with other people to achieve something, rather than just go, in my department, I only see this or I only see that, or our process, my favorite one is, well, it's always been that way, so we don't want to change it. What do you say to that?
I see a couple of observations. Students, very often in our College of Business, I want to own my own business.
Yes.
I think rather than what we can teach in the classroom, it takes some wisdom and experience. I have a friend who has a business that started from scratch. I mean, it was a struggle from the beginning. It's a multi-million-dollar international business that sells protective equipment for firefighters and people in that area. Well, he had a son and a son-in-law who wanted to go into the business, and they graduated college thinking they were going to walk in and take over for dad. Well, Dad's personality is such they'll never really take over until they carry him out on a stretcher. But the point is that both of those guys, the son and the son-in-law, they had to go work for somebody else for 5 years to not only depend on what they learned in college, but to get some wisdom and experience and see some things that are going on in the real world.
That's interesting. And in all of this discussion, one of the things that comes out, or two things that really strike me as something that are things that are often overlooked in the strategic planning process is, one, the value proposition of the business itself. What exactly is your core business? And it ties into what you're saying, Larry. Does it fit in today's time? And then second, what exactly is the structure of the market or the demand for whatever good or service that you're providing? And we see huge changes right now, and those things seem to be sometimes overlooked or taken for granted.
I think to get the vision right, one of the things I was reading the other day, any organization that is getting into a legitimate planning process, the suggestion is that they get a facilitator. If you don't have an outside facilitator that comes in to give some guidance and give some challenges, a lot of fluff comes out of those meetings when those are not there. You have the underlings who are sitting there looking to see what their supervisor is going to say or see what the CEO is going to say, and you don't get a good broad spectrum of input because people are scared to speak their own minds of what they think is good for the company. So I think a facilitator would be great to make the process work for the organization out there. To follow up also, another point, a fallacy that I see in strategic planning and dealing with students who we guide to develop strategic plans. They want, when it gets to establishing objectives and goals, they think more is better. They may turn in a paper with 8 objectives and 6 goals underneath, and it means that we translate that you can't be all things to all people. And the first thing that we tell them is to prioritize those and eliminate those that are nominal and not important, and concentrate on 1, 2, or 3 goals at the most in a process. So that addresses the flaw that some companies want to try to be all things to all people when it won't work. You don't have the resources. You're too diluted to accomplish anything meaningful.
Well, that also leads into management styles. When people first get into management, more often than not, they don't know what they're doing. Or they either go into a power trip or they try to figure out where they fit. And often, especially in middle management, their job is to make everybody happy. The upper people and the lower people. And they've got to get everybody somewhere in between happy. So they're not the ones who usually cause a lot of grief because they know one side's going to be angry at them at all times. So they try to keep very neutral. Then you've got the upper managers who need to get things done. And you've got the people either moving up or at the lower ends who just are following what needs to be done. So there's, in a lot of companies, what I've always seen is the communication gap, or like you said, everybody agrees on everything. That way everybody's happy. And nothing gets done. Do you see that right now in business, that we're looking for consensus rather than leadership? Because strategic planning and leadership go hand in hand.
There are a lot of variables out there in terms of leadership styles. And you have that question, are leaders born or made? Mm-hmm. I think there's a combination of those things in there. If a child, I think, is brought up in a family that is very, there's not much assertion or leadership, there's not a model to see really how to be a leader. Mm-hmm. And, I think there's a cultural or a social issue related to the family that you come into. But then, for example, I mean, if you're in a family and the father is very autocratic and maybe even overbearing, that's the style that a young man might see, and that may be the foundation of his leadership style, unless you see some alternative. And yet, autocratic leadership is a turnoff to a lot of employees. my approach to leadership, it depends upon a number of things. My capabilities as a leader, I may be a strong leader, I may have limitations as a leader, but you also need to consider the characteristics of the employees, those that are following. Are they competent? I mean, my belief as a leader, I would like to surround myself with the most competent people that I could find, and they make themselves look good, and in turn they would make me look good. And yet I've seen some so-called leaders with such levels of personal insecurity that they surrounded themselves with the weakest people because that would not present a threat to their self-image. I think there's a situational element also. One of the examples that I use, if you have a warehouse that is full of something perishable, say bags of sugar or maybe bags of salt, and somebody's running a forklift and they hit that water spout up there to kick on when there's a fire, and the water starts going all over those bags of salt or sugar or anything else that's perishable, you don't call their group together, hey, we need a meeting, we've got some water spurting out here in the warehouse, and we need to get together and vote and let's have a meeting. The thing that you need to do is be pretty autocratic and either make a run or send someone to cut off the water valve. So there are lots of elements, and the thing of leadership is pretty complex.
Well, that's true, but okay, I just have, this is just food for thought. Okay, but sometimes in our situation in the world, some of the worst leaders are the most effective managers. I mean, in terms of ethics.
Did you say? I'm sorry. Did you say the worst? I'm sorry. Did you say, Susan? Did you say the worst leaders are the most effective managers?
Yes.
Okay.
And let me go into this. I'm thinking about right now, with a lot of uncertainty in the world, there are a lot of people who are totally making decisions for security. So they will do anything to be able to be taken care of. You know, it's Maslow's hierarchy of demands, and they're right there on the bottom rung. They want to have food and shelter. So it leads itself to mad messiah types and doomsday cults. And I just see that a lot of companies as well as countries are leaning toward messianic leader types. I mean, look at Venezuela and a lot of the Middle East countries and a lot of our own companies. So, Larry, what do you see about that? And I mean, is it necessarily a bad thing for your organization to have a messianic leader, at least for a while, before the suicide cult kicks in?
Rick, could you repeat? I didn't get the end of that. Could you repeat?
She was saying go ahead, Susan.
Well, okay. So let's say that we have a extremely efficient organization because we have a very visionary leader who is absolutely visionary in what he or she wants to do, and the followers are there because he or she provides them with a sense of security, a sense of belonging, a sense that they have medical insurance. But this is actually a leader who's kind of okay with having kind of a doomsday cult, kind of, we are different from the rest of the world and we're together against it all. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, in your opinion?
I think it would not be a great thing. I mean, there are those who suggest that happy employees are more productive employees. I think employees operating out of fear, maybe because of autocratic leadership, is not productive, and there probably would be some elements of undermining within the system, and I think you can't have the country club atmosphere to be the most productive. The world is pretty competitive out there. Whether it's in your industry, the oil and gas industry, is pretty competitive out there now, and I'm not sure that the focus would be based upon, keeping everybody happy. I think it might depend upon some hard decisions and require commitments of those employees, regardless of what their responsibilities are.
And it's interesting. We have a lot we can learn from dogs. If you look at a dog, a strong alpha, a strong leader makes for a very happy, maybe not happy, a very secure pack. The more not controlling, the better the leadership of the alpha dog, the better the pack reacts together and works together, because short of somebody challenging the alpha, which doesn't happen that often, the packs are comfortable. They're secure in what that alpha is doing because that's how they're built. Now, we're a little bit different. However, under strong leadership also, you may not have to like the leadership. The military proves this all the time. In the military, you may not have an officer you like all that much, but you will obey that order. You will do what it takes because you're part of the team. Sometimes there's breakdown, and when you have a breakdown in the military, it's bad. It's really bad because lives are definitely at stake. But here you have somebody who's trained to be a leader. He may be a natural leader, or she may be a natural leader, whoever. But depending on the situation, how they handle the leadership in a military situation, they're very organized. They're very disciplined to work a certain way because they know if they don't, you're dead. In a corporation or government, it's different because now you've got more creativity, if you will. You've got people with a lot of different ideas. You've got people who maybe don't want to be there. Maybe they do. They have to be there versus wanting to be there. So it's a little different. But I'd say in management, of managers I've met, for example, the strongest ones were the ones who weren't afraid to lead, and yet treated their people fairly. But they didn't go out of their way to be super nice to people. They just were fair. And people seem to appreciate that.
I think the fair is the key word. You're talking about the military. It has to be autocratic because, people's lives are at stake in a wartime situation or a potential wartime situation. They may not be in a war environment on a given day, but the next day they might. So it has to have that structure. Now, I've seen people who were strong military leaders who come into civilian life and fell on their face because that military leadership style didn't work in the corporate world.
Right.
I've seen situations where they had retired military people move into, my arena, higher education. They're going and become a president of a university. Try to run it like the military, and they generally didn't last long.
Yeah, because there's a time and place for it, but it works beautifully in the military because it has to. It couldn't work any other way. You can't have an say, "Men, do you want guys want to take that hill? Anybody want to volunteer?" No. But that's the old joke about the
Not today.
What, Susan?
Yeah, not today.
Not today.
Tomorrow.
Well, you remember the old joke about the Italian army during World War II, right? Mussolini got in front of all of them and said,
The temperature is not right today. Let's wait till tomorrow to attack. Make it cloudy. I think the key word that you said was fair. There could be different styles of management, different personalities, but I think if the followers, the employees feel they're being treated fairly, I think that's a key and very significant point to their contributions to the success of an organization.
Yeah, and part of the problem is hiring the right people. So there's always that side of the equation too. If you hire, I remember Southwest Airlines, they had a policy when somebody gave notice, they were escorted out the door that moment. They were paid a week or two and they were escorted out. They said, "No, you're no longer part of us, you're gone." And they said to them that worked because they were such a team operation that if anybody left a team at that point, they were cancerous to the team and they were escorted out. And it's an interesting philosophy. I understand it. It makes sense in some ways, and they're very successful in how they've done that, but that is how they looked at life, and it worked well for them in that.
In the long run, in the big picture, that might be much less expensive than leaving them on the job for
That's true.
after their notice.
Yep, that's very true.
Well, one thing that I find to be really fascinating right now is the fact that autocratic leadership does not really lend itself to innovation. But if we really want to compete, we have to be innovators, and we have to be able to listen and try creative solutions. And it also has to be relaxed enough. The environment needs to be relaxed enough that people are not afraid to give their potentially harebrained ideas some time and space.
I think that's right. I mean, you have to have a good vision, and there has to be some innovation. I was thinking about something today. I was flying on airplanes last week, and the drinks that they come around and offer, Coke, Dr. Pepper, whatever. I try not to do that. And I was thinking this weekend, Gatorade works much better for me. And I was kind of wondering why maybe the Gatorade company couldn't be innovative and package their product in cans like the airlines want to match the size of the Cokes and make that as an alternative, maybe a more healthy drink than the Cokes and the Dr. Peppers and other soft drinks that they have out there.
So why do you think Gatorade is healthful?
Is what? I'm sorry?
She said, why do you think Gatorade is helpful?
Well, if you've been out in the world like today, you spend too much time outside and you're perspiring, you get your electrolytes all messed up, and you get some Gatorade to reestablish that, maybe give a little energy and sugar.
And on
you, Larry.
Well, and on planes you dehydrate. So
yeah, right.
Actually, that's sort of funny because a lot of people get on planes. If you've ever flown first class, people drink so much alcohol that they're beyond dehydrated by that point. I go, that's probably the worst thing you can actually drink on a plane. On a long flight, it kills you. It's just one of the worst things. But I know why they do it. Most of them are tense. They're a little nervous of flying, so they drink a little bit more. But it's interesting because but the Gatorade is a good one for a plane because water doesn't always help. Sometimes it does, but you don't get the electrolytes in the water. So that'd be a good idea.
I was just looking at it from the point of view of an artificial beverage that just has some electrolytes thrown in it that's not really the same as juice or fruit. But Larry, you successfully dodged my question. Okay, so Larry, how on earth do we create a streamlined leadership that essentially is autocratic or as you're pointing out, it's efficient? And people do it because they feel like they have to because of sense of emergency. But eventually that organization will die because it's closed to innovation and dissident or dangerous ideas. So how do you incorporate or let potentially dangerous ideas in the door?
I think Skype has not been my friend.
No, I have trouble hearing that too. But what Susan was saying was, how do you incorporate ideas when there is an autocratic kind of? How do you innovate? How do you incorporate ideas? How do you deal with that?
Ideas in the door.
I'm sorry. How do you what?
Dangerous ideas.
Dangerous ideas in the door. Ideas that can destabilize the autocratic management.
And you need innovation.
And you still need innovation.
Allow for innovation.
Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't improve things till you improve the leader. I mean, you look at. Let's use for example the NFL. I mean, sometimes you got to replace the coach.
Yeah.
The style is not correct. They're ineffective, and so for an organization to be successful, sometimes it's its own worst enemy, and it can't be successful until you replace that style of leadership. Now, a given style of leadership may be bad in one organization, but may work in another organization.
I would suggest that in any organization, there has to be some potential for having pilot programs or something, but at least have a way for people to voice the crazy ideas and then discuss them and then see how they might relate to what they're doing. And then also go out there and do environmental scans and see how the competition is doing crazy things. What kind of dangerous ideas or crazy ideas, disruptive are really getting at disruptive technology in a way.
You know, you have to have that innovation, and you have to have the freedom to explore the unknown, the things that haven't been done in the past, and some will work and some would not work. But you've got to have those ideas to try them and once in a while you'll have a success. You look thinking back to President Kennedy, who had the vision to send spaceships to the moon, and there was not the technology there at the point to do that, and it took a while to get things together to make that happen. But you have to have that innovative vision, and maybe that's an extreme, but I think successful businesses in a competitive world, that competitive edge is important, and that free spirit thinking, as you indicated, would sometimes pay off, and there has to be that freedom to explore.
So Larry, would you invest in SpaceX?
Did you say, would you invest in Staples?
SpaceX.
Oh, SpaceX. Oh, no. SpaceX. Susan wants to go into space.
Not just space, Mars.
Mars.
You're talking, you want to ride on the private Branson ship and go to Mars?
I do. And it's just in your backyard, just like, 1,000 miles or so down in Brownsville.
Well,
don't you guys have a campus in Brownsville?
I'm sorry, what did you...
Don't you have a campus in Brownsville? Campus.
You said, don't you have a campus in Brownsville?
Oh, no, that's University of Texas. That's their competitor.
Well, one of these days, Susan's going to broadcast from space on Mars, and it should be fun.
And yeah, it'll be better than Skype.
Well, leaving it at that, we are pretty much at the end of our time. Larry, this was fun. We really appreciate you coming on. I'd love to have you back on again, because there are so many things we haven't talked about. And I know you're an economics professor, too. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about economics and when did banks especially forget all of my... I know when they did, but I used to be in banking, too. I worked for Citibank, and I also did insurance with Marsh & McLennan, and one of our biggest clients is GE and GE Capital. So we know a little bit about banking, and even a lot of people going, when did banking just stop being banking? And most of it's government related, because they force them to loan money to people who can't pay money back, which is kind of insane. But it's interesting. But there's a lot of economic things going on right now. You've always got the dire predictions, somebody saying the world's coming to an end, and the other people say, no, everything's great. So somewhere in between, there's a lot of reality, and that's not sure, but I'd love to have that as a topic for the future.
It'd be great.
It'd be a fun talk. And by then, hopefully, Susan's on Mars, and she'll be transmitting with her Skype Mars add-on, and it should be good.
You know what?
It'll be better than the signal today.
Maybe.
I have to apologize for my audio.
Are you in Norman today?
Yes.
Okay.
Knowing Susan, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
No, I think she'll do it. She's been really focused on it for about a month now. It's SpaceX every show. She's on a mission, literally.
That's what all that practice flying is about, just to get acclimated, I suppose. Yeah. So just keep on going into outer space one of these days.
Now, Susan, all you have to do is move to California for about 6 months, and you will see extraterrestrial beings right here walking around.
Reptilians?
A reptilian or whatever.
Or the pale grays with the big eyes.
I don't know. They were in every uniform you could find out here. Costumes and everything. Anyway, Larry, that was a lot of fun. We appreciate you coming on. I think maybe it'll give people some food for thought on strategic planning and how to do it, and how not to be afraid to do it, and open your mouth up in a meeting and say, look, has anybody ever thought of this? And, it's an important thing. Without that, like you said, there's no way to really gauge or know what your strategy is. Where are you moving forward? How are you moving forward?
That's correct. This has really been fun. I've enjoyed it, and I would look forward to another brainstorming session on economics or some other topics.
That sounds great. Susan?
Cool. I'm totally for it.
Well, Larry, we will see you next time. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, there's a little like button. Click it if you like us. And if not, subscribe, and you'll know when we're on. We're on every week, and we will see you next week. Have a good one, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Larry. Great job.
I enjoyed it. See you later.